Welcome back to BYoungMinistry.com, to another blog and to another podcast. Today we continue in our study of Hebrews chapter 11, verses 32 through 34, which reads, "And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies." That's Hebrews chapter 11, verses 32 through 34. Today we return to our study of faith in Hebrews chapter 11. This passage describes the faith of people who were used by the God of the Bible to bring about His culture. History proves faith does not act blindly. It evaluates, it weighs the possibilities, and it takes note of the faithfulness of the object that it trusts. Biblical faith takes educated risks in the God of the Bible. In today's passage, we read of notable people who maintain their faith in the God of the Bible. In these three verses, starting with the Judges, the writer of Hebrews rapidly moves us to the Old Testament prophets. His point, history, has always made it clear that it is faith in the God of the Bible which ushers in His involvement in and through our lives. Notice with these words is described the intensity of the difficulties and subsequent faith in the lives of these Old Testament believers. These believers endured life and death situations because they were convinced of the utter faithfulness of God. When God sees fit to expose us to the intense type of pain described here, courage is required. There are 6 men mentioned in verse 32, and they are not in chronological order, but they were all very critical to the nation of Israel establishing itself in the promised land. And each of them required great courage for their faith in the God of the Bible to be demonstrated. The first was Gideon, who was a leader who made important decisions for the people of Israel. Gideon faced a 135,000-man Midianite army. And even though he began with 32,000, God pared it down to 300 men. For Gideon, all military strategy was out the window, because there's no military strategy by which 300 men can defeat 135,000 soldiers. Gideon was at the mercy of God, who instructed him to gather pitchers used for pouring water, trumpets, and torches. Then he told Gideon to go to the Midianite army armed with these 3 very important weapons. Gideon didn't argue, and per God's instructions, he split his 300 men into 3 groups. At a certain strategic point, Gideon ordered them to light their torches, and at the appropriate time, they were to smash the clay pots. The breaking of the pitchers made so much noise the sound reverberated in the dark. Then the lights with the torches dispelled the darkness with such bright light. The Midianites were caused to be confused. And then the men of Israel loudly sounded their trumpets. As a result, the Midianites panicked and were subsequently defeated. That day, Gideon vanquished the enemy, and weakness was turned to strength. And he became powerful in battle and routed this foreign army. Then there was another man of battle, Barak, who had 10,000 men, and he was going against the massive force of Sisera, the Canaanite commander. The odds were greatly against Barak, and he had no way to win. But God sent a message to Barak through a woman by the name of Deborah. Barak believed the message that God would give him, that God would give him a victory, which was the message from God through Deborah. Gideon and Barak gained what was promised. Then we come to Samson, who demonstrated great courage in the God of the Bible. Samson rose to the place of leadership because of his prowess and his strength, and he was called by God to conquer the Philistines. He never feared to enter into battle, and he knew that at any point in time his strength came from the Lord. The symbol of Samson's strength was his Nazirite vow. Samson's strength came from the Lord, and he knew when he went into battle that at any moment that strength could disappear, because he knew in his own heart, and he knew he was not a man who had by any means deserved this power. At the end of his life, due to a series of poor decisions, Samson was compromised and bound by the Philistines. But he recovered his strength and went into the Philistine temple and brought it down on the Philistines. The next name in today's list of faithful Old Testament believers is Jephthah, who was driven away from his family as an adult because he was considered an illegitimate child. But there came a day when the Israelites were about to fight the Ammonites, and they requested, of all people, Jephthah to fight for them. When life is hard, one learns valuable lessons of making it. And for Jephthah, the difficulties in his life taught him to be dependent upon the Lord. After the people requested the help of Jephthah, he accepted their request and went out to battle. He crossed over to the sons of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord gave them into his hand. Jephthah's life teaches us God can use us regardless of our background. The last list of names in today's passage are David and Samuel and the prophets. King David is the most notable here, and his victory over Goliath is the most notable battle in all of the Old Testament. This teenage kid was used of God to deal with Israel's greatest enemy at the time. Goliath was intimidating, for he was about 9 feet tall. When David went down into the valley to spar with Goliath, everyone laughed. But David was not afraid. You see, fear is the opposite of faith. In fact, when we are given in to fear, we are going backwards. It is said that 85% of all things we fear never happen. When we are living by faith in the God of the Bible, we are advancing. That day, David and Israel advanced because the day before this battle, David was pronounced to be the next king of Israel. David had learned to be defined by God, and so, that day, he went into battle against Goliath. He was armed with the vision of God. Having shut the mouth of lions and bears, that day David didn't see a giant. He saw a big target. Goliath presented himself that day a total of 80 times, challenging Israel over a 40-day period of time. A total of 80 times. On day 40, David showed up and escaped the edge of the sword, and like all of the others, his weakness was turned to strength. David defeated Goliath because he remembered past victories of God. He remembered those many times that he protected the sheep in the wilderness from lions and bears. Fear in the present is conquered by recalling victories of God in our past. If we have a good memory and a sound theology, we are prepared for battle. That day, David became powerful in battle. David defeated Goliath because he realized his personal assets. That day, David had 5 smooth stones with which to level Goliath. And, oh, by the way, his 4 brothers. And due to the smoothness of these stones, they were rather aerodynamic. And when David used one of those stones, it hit Goliath at just the right spot, and he went down. That day, God gave David the victory over the much more sizable Goliath. David was prepared that day because he had done his homework, knowing Goliath had 4 other brothers which may have potentially retaliated against him after knocking down Goliath. Therefore, David chose 5 stones in order to prepare for his battle against Goliath and his very large brothers. And that day, David took on his giants with the giants-sized, saturated soul of God. David conquered Goliath that day because he was dependent upon God's power. He showed up discussing God, yet talking about him. No one else talked about God that day. Everybody talked about how big Goliath was. David discusses no one else but God. Goliath was not just attacking any old army. He was attacking the people of the Lord. And that day, David came in the name of the Lord, and he gained what was promised by God. If we are to slay giants, we must have a healthy respect for the God of the Bible. When God is magnified in our hearts, our fears are vanquished. The others could not win these battles because they compared Goliath's size to their size. And as a result, they feared. David compared Goliath to God. And as a result, he won the battle. My friends, I trust this blog and this podcast are helpful to you in your walk with the Lord. If I can be of further assistance to you, shoot me an email at BYoungMinistry@gmail.com. Hey, have a great day.